Brothers in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As you can probably tell, I've got a bit of a cold, not been well for a few days, but alhamdulillah, better today. Now, this subject that I'm speaking about today, it can be a difficult subject. The subject is, I'm refuting Richard Dawkins. You've heard of Richard Dawkins? Can I have hands up? Who's heard of Richard Dawkins? Okay. Some of you didn't put your hands up. And I know you know who he is, but anyway. I'm refuting. Now this is the subject is in fact existence of Allah. Now you can speak about this subject. People asked me in the past, speak about this subject, because I've spoken about this subject elsewhere, but never at this center. And a couple of people approached me and said, speak about this subject. And I said, no, I'm not going to speak about this subject. Because I think sometimes the audience that we get isn't right for it. But today, alhamdulillah, it looks like the right audience. What I'm trying to say is sometimes when you get the older people who can't understand the language so well, it's difficult to speak about the subject. But the thing is, even today, what I've done is I've really narrowed the subject down. What I'm going to do is take Richard Dawkins' argument, his main argument, and I'm going to refute that. Okay, so I'm not going to try and prove the existence of Allah using my own arguments as a whole, because there's many things I could say. I'm going to take this one argument and I'm going to refute that. So I'm not covering the whole subject, I'm covering part of the subject. Okay, now, I was even thinking that if we get the wrong audience, I'll change the subject completely before the talk. I'll speak about something else. But alhamdulillah, we've got the right type of people. Now, there's a few points to make before we go into the subject itself. Number one, this subject, they say it's a bit risky to speak about. Let me give you a story here. There's a scholar in Iran. There was a scholar by the name of Ayatollah Tabatabai. And he was going to teach philosophy in the Hawza. And when he began to teach philosophy, the marja, the top scholar at that time, Ayatollah Burujardi, he got a bit upset. And he said, you shouldn't teach people this subject, the philosophy of Mullah Sadra. And he threatened, he said that if the students go to your classes, I will take away their stipends, the money that you give the students, because students don't work, they need some money to live on. And Ayatollah, he asked him, why is this? And he said, because if we speak about this subject, it may lead people away from the religion. Because then you're asking questions. See, people are Muslims or they're Christians, they believe in Allah, they believe in God. But when you start asking, does God exist? Suddenly they start asking themselves the question and they might leave the religion. But then Ayatollah Tabatabai said, look, you think that people don't think about this subject already. The thing is, people are already questioning, does Allah exist? Does God exist? People every day think about this in their own lives. We need to answer the question. Now, the fact is, Ayatollah Burujardi said, I study the subject and I read these books myself, but he thought it wasn't suitable for the students. But anyway, afterwards they began to teach it. Now, when you talk about the existence of God, the way I see this is like this. If you've heard me speak on this before, I see the existence of God as like a jigsaw puzzle. There's a picture there. We're trying to work out, does God exist? There are different pieces that you need to put together, different arguments, not just one argument, many arguments. I can think of about 12 arguments. You put them together, you get the whole picture. You use one argument on its own, it's not really going to prove what you want to prove, that Allah exists. Okay, so you use all these different arguments. I can't go through all these arguments today. There's no chance. I need a few hours at least, 2 or 3 hours. So we'll go through a few of the arguments, the ones that relate to Richard Dawkins' argument. So what you should do is try and do your own study afterwards. Try and look into the subject yourself. If what I say doesn't make sense, Ayatollah Khomeini says some of the arguments for the existence of Allah can be so bad that people will actually stop believing in Allah. He says some of the arguments can be that bad. So instead, if the argument is bad and if what I say is not convincing, then don't follow me. Okay, do your own research. So that's basically what I want to say before we go into the subject. Now, Richard Dawkins, he's written this book, The God Delusion. It's a 400-page book, big book, bestseller, New York Times bestseller, very famous book. In this book, he tries to show that the belief in God is irrational. It's not a good belief to have. And he has his main argument, his central argument, which is made up of 6 points. I was thinking to myself, maybe we could put the argument, project the argument on the wall because it's a long argument. And I want to go through it point by point. But I'm not sure if we should do that or not. I'm not sure. Brother Razi says that perhaps...
If you continue, I'll have a look, see if I can cater for it.
But I'm still not, okay. What we'll do is, because the thing is, if I'm reading it, it's very hard for people to keep up. It's like this long paragraph. It's very, very difficult, so I'm not 100% sure. What we could do is maybe just try. I'll read it, and if people want to put it up, we'll put it up, okay? So can we have salawat before we go through this argument? Now, like I said, the subject is huge, and this is very specific. So don't think to yourself, yeah, today I'm going to have all the arguments to be able to argue with an atheist. So Richard Dawkins says in his main argument, because he's the most famous atheist in the world, so this is an important argument. He says, point number 1, he has 6 points, and then he says God doesn't exist at the end of it. Point 1, if it gets difficult, please just try and bear with me. Point 1, one of the greatest challenges to human intellect, over the centuries has been to explain how complex, improbable appearances of design in the universe arise. He says that when we look at the universe, there are complex things in the universe, complex entities. In other words, when you look at the universe, when you look at a human being, it looks like it's been designed. Point number 2, I think I'll actually shorten the points. The natural temptation is to attribute the appearance of design to actual design itself. Okay, so point 2, he says, is when you look at the design, you think God has designed it. I think we won't need it. I'm going to summarize the points, okay? So we can switch it off. No, it's okay, we can switch it off because I'll summarize the points because it might distract people. Point 2 is that when you look at the design, you think someone's designed it. When you look at a painting, your mind tells you someone painted it. If you walked on the street and you saw 3 bricks on top of each other, very simple model, very simple structure, but you still think someone must have put the bricks on top of each other. It didn't just fall like that. It wasn't like there was an explosion in a brick factory. All the bricks exploded and they all fell in a line, or they all fell together to make a house. So when you look at design, you think someone designed it. Point 3, now this is his main point. He says this temptation is a false one. He's saying when you look at design, don't think someone designed it. Because the designer hypothesis asks the question, now this is a killer question. Okay, this is a tough question. I don't know if you've heard this question before. And I hope no one becomes a kafir after listening to this. He says the designer hypothesis asks the question, raises the question, the larger problem, who designed the designer? Who designed the designer? He's saying that if we're saying that there is design in the universe, therefore there has to be a designer, who designed the designer? And this is the question that we need to answer. The whole problem we started out with was the problem of explaining statistical improbability. I'm not going to read the whole thing here. But basically saying who designed the designer. It is obviously no solution to postulate something even more improbable. Now what he's trying to say here is this. He's saying that the universe is complex. So we ask the question, who designed the universe? But if there's a designer, that designer would be even more complex. When you make something, you are more complex than the thing. Someone made this, but the person who made it is more complex. That's his point. So he says here, we need a crane. Now I'm going to end with this and then give my own argument. We need a crane, not a skyhook. What he's trying to say is when you look at a crane, cranes make things. The crane starts off from the ground. You have to make the crane first, then the crane makes other things. Crane starts off, you know what a crane is, moves things around, makes a building. He says we need a crane. In other words, we need something which starts off from the ground, which is simple itself, and then makes other complicated things. Whereas a skyhook is something that comes from the sky, it has no foundation. He's saying evolution is the crane. It starts off with simple things and it gets more complex. Whereas God is like the skyhook, it's already complex. So his argument is, why don't we just say that things were simple and then they became more complex? Why do you need to say there was this big complex creature or being called Allah, and then Allah made something which was the universe? Okay, so that's 3 points of his argument, and I'll go through the rest of his argument later on. In fact, that's 4 points pretty much. So can we have salawat before I refute this? Okay, now he's saying, why do we need to believe? Basically, the argument is this. Why can't we just believe the universe is just like that, without a creator? If we're going to say there's a creator, then the creator is more complex, then we might as well just say, look, the universe exists on its own. Why bring in something more complicated, make the whole picture more complex? Well, here's the simple answer. The simple answer is this. The difference between the universe and Allah, there are many differences, but the difference between creation and Allah, one of the differences is that Allah is timeless, whereas the universe is in time, is temporal. The universe has time. Let me give you the argument of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A group of atheists came to Prophet Muhammad, and this is recorded in the book Al-Ihtijaj of Tabrisi, which is a very famous book from the Shia, and the narration is considered authentic by the scholar who has written it down. He said a group of atheists come to Prophet Muhammad and they say to him that we believe the universe was not created. The universe had no beginning and it has no end. The universe is eternal. And therefore, because it's eternal, there's no need for God. It's eternal. No beginning, no end. Prophet Muhammad says to them, what if someone says to you the universe has a beginning and it has an end? How do you respond? How do you know if you are right or they are right? And these atheists say, we don't know. How can we prove the universe has a beginning or doesn't have a beginning? How can we prove that? So Prophet Muhammad then goes on to prove it. He says, if the universe has no beginning, then we wouldn't be here today. This is a very central argument, very key point. If the universe had no beginning, we wouldn't be here today because the previous time wouldn't have passed away. It's a strong philosophical argument. It's called in philosophy, it's called the impossibility of infinite regress. I hope I'm not losing people here. Impossibility of infinite regress. Let me give you an example. If there's a soldier who's fighting, or if there are a group of soldiers and they're about to attack, they're about to start the war, they're about to attack the enemy, and one of the soldiers says, look, I will attack the enemy when the person next to me, the soldier next to me, to the left of me, attacks first. If he attacks, then I will attack. So I'm not going to attack until the person next to me attacks. Do you all understand that point? The person next to him says, look, I won't attack until the person next to me attacks. And the person next to him says, I won't attack until the person next to me attacks. What if this line was infinite? Will the first person attack? Never. Okay? If you have a group of dominoes, long line of dominoes, and they're infinite, will the last domino fall? It won't fall. In other words, you need a beginning. Okay? You can't regress. Regress means go backwards infinitely. Infinite regression is impossible. It cannot happen. So Prophet Muhammad is saying, if the universe had no beginning, if time had no beginning, we wouldn't be here today. Simple argument, and it destroys the claim that the universe is infinite in regression. There are two other arguments you can give. The Muslim scholars call them mutakallimun. They give two other arguments as well, but I think maybe we don't need to go into those two arguments. This is enough. Universe has to have a beginning. So the point is this: anything temporal means it has time as a property. Okay, it has time as a property. Let me try and quote to you one of the most famous physicists. In fact, he is probably the most prominent physicist in the world. There's Stephen Hawking, but he's retired. So there's this other physicist. His name is Paul Davies. He says that, I hope I haven't forgotten this, I'll hear this. He says, you can't have time without space, or space without time. Now, the point he's making here is, this is called Einstein's theory of relativity. When you have space like we have here, when you have, for example, a book like this, the book has to exist within time. Space and time are all one thing. If you think about it, if you imagine a place, like you imagine a room, that room will have time. I don't know if you can do that. it's a philosophical idea and it's also mathematical, it's physical. Einstein showed that space and time is one thing. Okay, in fact, you know when gravity increases, the earth has gravity, space has less gravity, so the earth has denser space. Time, I think, slows down or speeds up near the earth, but when you go further away from earth, time changes. They've shown this. Time and space are one thing. Now, the theory of the Big Bang basically showed, and the Big Bang theory, we could say, agrees with what the Islamic scholars have always said, that the universe came into existence. The universe came into existence. So there was no universe, there was no space, there was no time. Then it came into existence, and then time began. Before that, there was no time at all. So wherever there's space, there will be time. And wherever there's time, there will be space. These two things go together. Paul Davies says, so if space cannot be continued back through the Big Bang, he says before the Big Bang, there was no space. Big Bang singularity, meaning there was nothing there. Then neither can time. This conclusion carries a momentous implication. Okay, let me jump what he's saying here. Then the Big Bang was not just the origin of space, but the origin of time. There was no time before the Big Bang. Okay, then here, let me just continue. I'm just going to skip what he said here. If there was no time before the Big Bang for a causative agency to exist, in other words, he's saying there was nothing physical which caused the universe to exist, then we can attribute no physical cause to the Big Bang. The question is, if the Big Bang happens, there was nothing. When there is nothing, can you get something? Something can't come from nothing. If you have, for example, a saucepan, and I want to cook food, and I put a glass of nothing, a teaspoon of nothing, a pinch of nothing, I stir it together, what do I get? Nothing. He said if there was no space, and if there was no time, then there can be no physical cause. Physical, he's highlighted, it's in italics, physical. In other words, there has to be another cause. Something can't come from nothing. There has to be a cause, but the cause can't be space or time. There has to be something beyond space and time. Okay? One of the attributes and qualities of Allah is outside space and Allah is outside of time. Okay, so when Richard Dawkins is asking the question, he's saying, why can't we just believe that the universe just is? You can't, because the universe is temporal. Anything that contains time cannot go back infinitely. It has to come into existence. Anything temporal has to come into existence. According to the scholars, the physicists, the philosophers, anything temporal has to come into existence. The only thing that doesn't come into existence is something timeless. It just is. People used to ask the Imams, when did Allah come into existence? When did Allah become? And the Imams used to say that you're asking a question of time. When doesn't apply to Allah. Allah is outside of time. Allah created time. Where is Allah? They say, where is a question of space. Allah is outside of space. Okay? So Allah is something that created space and time. Now, so the answer to Dawkins' question is basically, you can't say the universe was eternal. Dawkins doesn't himself believe that exactly. Because the universe is temporal. So the universe has to come into creation. Therefore, there has to be something there to bring it into creation. Okay? There has to be something there to bring it into creation. It doesn't matter if that thing is complex. It doesn't matter. We don't believe Allah is complex like a machine. It doesn't matter if the thing is complex. The fact is, something had to bring the universe into existence. Something had to bring temporal things into existence. And that's the basic argument. It's as simple as that. He's saying, who designed Allah? The answer is, if something is timeless, it didn't come into existence. Therefore, there was no need for a designer. It just was. Where the universe came into existence, you have to ask, who designed it? It came into existence. See, you can't say Allah is temporal. Allah has time. Because if Allah had time, then you would ask, who created Allah? Because time can't go back infinitely. And that's the basic argument. Can I, like a teacher, I'm a teacher, Who understands what I've just said? You get the gist of it. The basic point is, anything which has time has to come into existence. That's the argument. Because otherwise you'd end up with an infinite regress. Yes?
I just lost you that bit where you said Allah did not come into existence. Time doesn't apply to Allah.
How did I get to that? What I'm doing is I'm saying that anything that has time, the universe has time, can't go back infinitely. Because time and space, time is the property of the universe. Time and space are one thing. So you could say time is a property of space, space is a property of time. Anything which has time, we are beings which live in time. We couldn't have existed forever. There has to be a time when we came into existence, otherwise there'll be an infinite regress. Creation, the universe couldn't be infinite all the way back in the past, otherwise we wouldn't be here today, like Prophet Muhammad said. So if something cannot be eternal, but it does exist, it means something brought it into existence. If a Big Bang happened and space and time were created, something brought it into existence. Would you agree with that? Would you say, at least you can understand my argument, even if you don't agree with it?
Yeah.
Now, whatever brings it into existence can't be something within time. If it was something within time, then you'd have to ask who created that. Okay, imagine it like this. Imagine if this is the Matrix. Okay, you know what the Matrix is, the movie The Matrix. Imagine if we are living in the Matrix and this universe was created by some scientists in the real world. Do you understand that? They created this universe, and then we would have to ask who created that universe? Because that universe also contains time. Anything which is temporal has to come into existence. Only timeless things can't come into existence. So the first cause has to be timeless. That's the main argument, basically. Okay? Anyway, I hope you understood that. If you didn't, then we can talk about it later on, inshallah. Okay, so that's the main argument that I'm using here. And I hope that's useful to people. I hope we learned something from that. Okay, so afterwards, Dawkins goes on to say, and I'm going to bring on other arguments here. Those are the first 3 points. He goes on to say, by the way, actually, before I go to the next points, let's talk about this. There's one point I didn't cover here because I didn't prepare the lecture. I just thought I'd go through the points. He's saying that the designer will be more complex than the thing which is designed. Now I say, even if it's more complex, it doesn't matter. As long as it's timeless, it doesn't need a creator, and the universe needs a creator because it's temporal, it's within time. Is Allah more complex? Is Allah complex? There are 2 things we can say here. First of all, we don't believe Allah is complex. None of the big religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, believe that Allah is a complex machine. We believe Allah is simple. We don't quite know what Allah is. We know Allah exists because there are proofs, but Allah is simple. The Christians say Allah is a spirit, Allah is a mind. And if you have a mind, you know your mind isn't complex. Your body is complex. The famous French philosopher René Descartes, he says, I can divide the physical world. I can't divide my mind. My consciousness is one thing. So we never believe that Allah is complex. But what proofs do we have that Allah is simple? Well, I gave one proof, which is the proof that if there is a mind doesn't need to be complex. A mind is simple. A soul is simple. And because Allah isn't spatial, as Allah isn't physical, you can't say Allah is complex. There was no space and time, so Allah can't be complex. There's more to it. I can go to mathematical proofs. There's someone called Kurt Gödel, but I don't want to do that. It's going off track. It's too detailed to show that Allah can't be complex. And inshallah, if I have time, I can go into that later on. Now, Dawkins then says, point number 4, the most ingenious and powerful crane so far is Darwinism. Now he's saying, look, we don't need to have God to show that there is design, to explain design. We can use evolution. Things were simple and they became more complex. That's his answer. We don't need God. Now there's a couple of problems with this. First of all, evolution explains how biological things evolved. I'm not saying evolution is false or if it's true, but evolution explains, if it's true, how animals evolved. Evolution doesn't explain the Big Bang. Dawkins goes on to say in point number 5, we have yet to discover an equivalent crane for physics, some kind of multiverse theory. Now, what he's saying here is, he's saying, look, we have evolution to explain how animals evolved, but we don't have evolution to explain why the universe is the way it is. Because the universe has been fine-tuned. You may have heard of this argument. They say the Big Bang happens and all these laws are put in place. As soon as the Big Bang happens, there's something called the Planck era, 1 out of 10 to the power of minus 43 seconds. The first instance in the universe, all the laws of the universe. Now, what are the laws of the universe? You may have heard of Einstein's E equals mc squared. Isaac Newton's force equals mass times acceleration. Kepler's gravity, the gravitational force equals the gravitational constant times the mass of two bodies divided by the radius squared, the radius between them squared. These laws, when you make a computer game, if anyone here does programming, if you do programming, imagine I'm a computer programmer, I do programming. When you want to make a computer game, you sit and write down laws. You write down rules, isn't it? Now what they do is, when computer programmers want to make the game replicate real life, they actually take the laws of physics and they write down these laws. They say when the football goes up in the air, it has to follow Einstein's law. So they put in Einstein's law. They have to write huge amount of laws. Like, for example, I asked one of the programmers of this football computer game, I said, how many lines of code does your game have? He said it has 1 million lines of code. 1 million lines written down. I think the operating system, Windows Vista or XP, has 500 million lines of code. You get one letter wrong, it won't work. It takes ages and ages to write down all this. The universe has laws, it has constants which came into existence straight away, instantly. There is an atheist by the name of Anthony Flew. He was an atheist. He's the most important atheist of the last 50 years. More important than Dawkins, because Dawkins is a populist. Flew is a first-class philosopher. Flew changed his mind. Flew became a theist. He's an old man now, he's in his 80s. He gives 3 reasons. He says one of the reasons is because when you look at the universe, all these laws are in place. It shows that there's some kind of intelligence. There's some kind of intelligence. Let me quote, if I can. Flew quotes Albert Einstein. Einstein, by the way, did believe in God. He just didn't believe in religion. He believed that God doesn't interact with us. It's called deism. Okay, our belief is called theism. We believe God exists and he interacts with us. He sends religion. Einstein didn't believe this. Let me quote Einstein. Einstein says, everyone who is seriously engaged in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that the laws of nature manifest the existence of a spirit vastly superior to that of men, and one in the face of which we with our modest powers must feel humble. He's saying that when I studied the universe, there is a pattern, there's a design. Why is it the Big Bang happens and it leads to us today? Did the universe know the laws that would lead to us? Paul Davies, the physicist, says he's amazed when he thinks about this. That the Big Bang happens, it continues. Today we have human beings and now we study the Big Bang. Did the universe plan for us to happen? Now, these things couldn't have happened if the right things weren't in place at the beginning. Now, this is called the fine-tuning argument. Now, let me give you examples of this. Let me quote. I don't normally do this, quote scientists. I usually talk my own. Okay, Paul Davies, the famous physicist, says, scientists are slowly waking up to the inconvenient truth, inconvenient to scientists. The universe looks suspiciously like a fix. He's written a book called called the Goldilocks enigma. Goldilocks, you know the story of Goldilocks. There's that bear, I think there's that person, girl. Goldilocks is a girl. And the three bears. And she goes to one of the bears' porridge and says, this is just right. Goldilocks enigma. He's saying the state of the universe was just right for what happened for life today. He says, I'm going to have to skip a lot of what he says. He says here, for 40 years, physicists and cosmologists have been quietly collecting examples of all too convenient coincidences and special features in the underlying laws of the universe that seem to be necessary in order for life and hence conscious beings to exist. Now he's saying certain things were in place at the beginning, conveniently. Change any one of them and the consequences would be lethal. Change the universe even slightly right at the beginning and we wouldn't have a universe. He gives an example. When the Big Bang happens, the universe begins to expand. The universe has to expand at a certain speed. If the universe expanded even slightly faster, then it would expand too quick and we wouldn't have planets and stars because gravity wouldn't be strong enough to make planets and stars. If the universe expanded even too slowly, it would collapse within itself and there would be nothing after that. Now he says that I hope I'm not going too quick. He says that if the expansion of the universe was out by 1 out of 10 to the power of 18. So if you have a number 1 followed by 18 zeros, if you have the number 1 followed by 18 zeros, it's a big number. Okay, million, billion, trillion, I don't know what it is. It's a big number. He said if the universe's speed was different by 1 out of that big number, imagine you had that many coins and you added one more coin. Do you understand what I mean to say? Or you took away one coin from that huge number of coins. That's how accurate we're talking about. That's how detailed it is. He says the universe wouldn't exist. There's another one. There's, for example, the ratio of electrons to protons. At the beginning, the universe had electrons and protons. The universe now has. Electrons go around protons and neutrons in the atom. If the ratio, the number of electrons compared to the number of protons was out by 1 to the power of 10, 1 out of 10 to the power of 37. So the number 1 followed by 37 zeros. Okay? Let me give you an example of what this means. If you have the continent of America, there's a scholar called Dr. Hugh Ross who gives this example. He says, if you have the continent of America, and on America you put a coin, a dime on every single part of America. Imagine how many coins you have. Huge amount. You raised those coins all the way up to the moon. You stacked them up on top of each other. And you had 1 billion of those continents. And then you told someone, you blindfolded them and said, okay, there's one coin I've colored red. Go and pick that one out. He says that's how accurate it is. The ratio of protons and electrons. Now I've given you 2 examples here. There are about 30 examples. The biggest one is the cosmological constant. 1 out of 10 to the power of 120. So all these things put into place, person thinks, look, this is a fix. So Anthony Flew says this is one of the reasons why he changed his mind. First of all, the universe comes into existence. At that split second, even less than a second, Planck time, the laws are in place, and we have to ask ourselves how. Why like this? It could have been some other way. Can we have salawat, please? Okay, now things get a bit more interesting here, because actually I've realized I can never cover this subject in the amount of time I wanted to cover it in. Things get a bit more interesting here. Because Dawkins says, now this is something I want to discuss. Dawkins says, we don't have a crane for physics. In other words, he's saying we don't have an evolution for physics. The laws came into existence straight away. By the way, I can't talk about this. If laws evolved, then they would require laws to make them evolve. I can't talk about that now. Later on, inshallah, if I get the chance. It's called something to do with genetic algorithms in computer science. Now he's saying here some kind of multiverse theory could, in principle, do for physics the same explanatory work as Darwinism does for biology. Okay, who's heard of this? Multiverse. You've heard of multiverse? So there's a theory now. Anthony Flew, he basically says, look, I think it's Anthony Flew, I think it is him who says this, or another scholar. He says that, it is him actually who says, he says that when you present this argument that universe comes into existence, all these laws are in place, scientists, or some atheists, shouldn't say scientists, atheists then, out of desperation, they're looking for some kind of answer. So they say multiverse. Multiverse. What does multiverse mean? There's a scientist called Lee Smolins, physicist. He says what we could say is there's a universe, and from the universe there are other universes popping into existence. Multiverse. Because the universe was nothing, and it exploded into a universe. He says in our universe there are many black holes. Maybe universes are coming out of these black holes. Multiverse. So there's a big universe, and out of these universes come loads of universes. So what Dawkins is saying here, and what the people who support this theory are saying is, maybe there's an infinite number of universes. One universe comes into existence, it has certain laws. Another universe comes into existence, it has certain laws. There's an infinite number of universes. One of them will have the laws that ours has, and will end up with life. Okay? Does that make sense? I think sometimes, okay, it's important to give, when you're giving proof, give the counter argument, and then counter that argument. It's not just good me just saying, yeah, this is the universe, and then people walk away. Let's look at the counter argument. Multiverse. There's a lot that can be said about this. Number one, physicists disagree with the multiverse theory, the top physicists. Paul Davies, John Barrow, they disagree. Top physicists in the world. Most physicists say, no, you can't have another universe coming out of a black hole. But let's just say that it's possible. There are problems with the multiverse theory. Paul Davies, he says the multiverse theory, here's the key. The multiverse theory does nothing except take the problem up one level. We're asking about this universe. The universe is temporal. It comes into existence. The multiverse would just become another universe, because the multiverse would be a mechanical system. It would also have time. It would also suffer from the impossibility of an infinite regress. It also has laws which create these universes. Who fine-tuned the multiverse? The multiverse is temporal. It comes into existence. It's a spatial system. It contains space and time. And it contains all these laws which create universes. Who fine-tuned the multiverse? It's the same problem. You've done nothing except take the problem one step further. Same problem. Okay, so the multiverse doesn't really solve anything. It has infinite regress as a problem, and who fine-tuned the multiverse? Can we have salawat, please? I know you don't do this in a lecture, but do we have questions? Yes.
At the beginning you said you had 6 main points. Can you just summarize those?
Okay, I'm going to summarize. These are Dawkins' points. These are not my points.
Yeah,
his main argument. He's saying point number one, there's design. Point number two, our intellect tells us if there's a designer, then there must be, if there's design, then there must be a designer. That's point number two. Point number three, he's saying, look, if there's a designer, then who designed the designer? Okay? Point number four, he's saying evolution is better than the idea of a designer. Point number 5 and 6, he's basically saying, look, we shouldn't give up hope that evolution will somehow explain how the laws of the universe came into existence. We shouldn't give up hope. Maybe the multiverse is an explanation itself. But the multiverse doesn't explain it. Multiverse just, in a way, complicates it. Multiverse is even more complex than the universe, and the multiverse has its own fine-tuning. Think about this, okay? If you have, if you play the national lottery, I think you can get random numbers. You press a button, the numbers come out. You don't choose the numbers yourself. Lucky dip, okay? But you have these tickets which come out of the machine. The multiverse theory is basically like that. You keep pressing the button, eventually you'll get the right ticket, you'll get the right universe. But the question is, who designed the machine that creates the multiverse? That creates these universes, sorry. Who designed that machine? That's the thing. Because you need a complex machine to create all these universes in the first place. Okay, can we have salawat, please? What I'm going to do now is now talk about the theory of evolution itself. Okay, now evolution itself, Dawkins says, he says that evolution can be used to explain why life is complicated. Now, what does our religion say about evolution? Islam itself is silent on evolution. As far as we are concerned, evolution is a scientific theory. It has nothing which would contradict our religion, except for one thing maybe, and that is what? The creation of Prophet Adam. That's the only thing. Evolution is no way contradictory with our religion. The Quran doesn't say that God created on this day, and then he had rest on that day. There's nothing like that. So we can believe in evolution scientifically because it doesn't contradict our religious beliefs, except for the creation of Adam. Now there's a scholar in Iran, his name is Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi. He says, what we can say if we accept evolution, let's say we want to accept evolution, there's enough evidence for it. He says, what we can say now is that the creation of Adam was an exception to the norm. Evolution happened, but Adam is special. He has a soul. He's different. He has intelligence. And we know we are different from other animals. We are special. You know, the other animals, they don't make progress like we do. They live and die every time, every generation after generation, they're the same. We make progress. We're special. We go all the way up to the moon. Now he says we could believe this is an exception. He says just like we believe that the birth of Prophet Isa is an exception. There's a normal system of how children are born, mother and father. But with Prophet Isa, only mother. He says, so we can take Prophet Adam's creation as an exception. There's no problem with that. And we can believe in evolution. However, the question is this. Does evolution prove that God doesn't exist? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. Well, if we believe in evolution, let's say evolution is true, it still doesn't prove that God doesn't exist. I'll give you two reasons for this. In fact, I can give you quite a few, but I'll give you two. Number one, first of all, you need the laws of physics in place right at the beginning for evolution to take place. That's the first thing. Okay? Second point, Anthony Flew, I like to quote him because he's like the most famous atheist of the last 50 years and he changes his mind, although I think his arguments need to be improved. Personally, he's like someone who's just a few years ago changed his mind. He said one of the things that made him change his mind is this. He says evolution can only explain how simple life forms turn into complex life forms. Evolution doesn't explain how life comes into existence itself. What he means by this is, for evolution to take place, you need a complex creature in the beginning. You need complexity. Because this is how evolution basically works. They say you will have reproduction. A man and a woman mate and you have children. Children will have differences. The ones who are stronger survive. The ones who are weaker die away. Now, when a man and a woman mate, what could happen is one of the children has a mutation. Something really strange about them happens. And that strange thing benefits them. Do you understand? Like they might grow a third arm. Okay? So they have 3 arms, they're stronger. Or you'll have loads of giraffes and suddenly there's a famine in Africa, but you have a mutation in one giraffe who ends up with a huge long neck. This giraffe will survive, the rest will all die. So mutation and natural selection. A mutation happens, some will die away, others will survive. The one who've mutated, they will have an advantage. Natural selection. This is a very simple way to put it. Basically, evolution is based on 2 things, is driven by 2 things, mutation and natural selection. What Flew says and what other people say is, for this to all occur, you need life in the first place. You need, because you get reproduction with a man and a woman, with a male and a female, but even bacteria reproduce. How do they reproduce? One bacteria splits into 2, and then they split. So they don't need male and female, they just split on their own. He says for that to occur, you need the bacteria to exist in the first place. Bacteria has DNA inside it. It has a membrane surrounding it. It is one cell. It has all these parts. It has mitochondria inside it. It has endoplasmic reticulum inside it. It has all these things inside it together as one cell. Then evolution can take place. Do you understand that? Then evolution. Then you can start having reproduction and variation amongst the species. Before that, you can't have evolution. There was a famous physicist. His name is Sir Fred Hoyle. Are you keeping up? Inshallah. Because we only have 10 minutes left, inshallah. Famous physicist, Fred Hoyle. Now he said, he made a calculation. He said that there are 2,000 types of proteins found in a single bacterium. 2,000 proteins make up one bacteria. He said for all these proteins to come together at the same time, because we're not saying bacteria evolve from nothing. We have nothing here, and the bacteria suddenly evolves. The theory of evolution says there was something which could reproduce, then evolution happened. But first you need that thing to exist, which would reproduce. Fred Hoyle, very, very famous physicist, incredibly famous. He's the one who coined the phrase the Big Bang. He's the one who came up with that phrase. And he didn't believe in the Big Bang, by the way. He says that there are 2,000 proteins coming together to create a single bacterium. He's talking about the proteins themselves. He's not talking about the whole structure, these individual proteins. In other words, there are 2,000 different types of bricks which make up a certain house. You need these 2,000 different types of proteins to make up a bacterium. He says the chances of them coming together is 1 out of 10 to the power of 40,000. We were talking about 1 times 10 to the power of 37, and I said you need all these continents with coins. 40,000, huge number. He said, and he has a famous analogy. He says, these people believe it is like there was a junkyard full of scrap metal and everything, and a hurricane came along, whirlwind, and it put all the parts together, and you ended up with a Boeing 747. He's saying that's what it's like. The cell, the first cell which came into existence, that's basically what you're saying. But it's much worse than that, as far as I'm concerned. Because proteins themselves need to come together before the bacterium comes together. Proteins are made from amino acids which need to be designed, which are made from atoms, which are made from, the core of the atom itself, quarks. So there's a lot of design inside design. So all these things have to come together before you can even have one cell. Anthony Flew says evolution doesn't explain this to us at all. Evolution only explains to us what happens afterwards, after the first cell starts out. Can we have salawat, please? You know what? I could speak a lot more, a huge deal more, because this is the subject that people ask me to speak about the most. So we'll end it there, inshallah. And if you have questions, you can have questions, please.